Hi everybody, we're going to do an auction preview today. I'm joined again by Mr. Thomas Perazzi, Head of Watches at Phillips Auctions. And Thomas, what do we have today? What are we looking at?
So first of all, thank you, Mike, for inviting me and Phillips at the Armory. It's a pleasure for us to show you some highlights of our upcoming auction that will be on June 5th and 6th. So I would like to start with an interesting and quite unusual and rare wristwatch that we're going to offer in Hong Kong. After the success of the November auction, we are here now offering another extremely important and rare vintage Panerai reference 6152. So, as you know, this is the iconic design of also the contemporary production of Panerai, the Luminor so-called case with a bridge that protects the crown. But here we have really the first generation, because still the dial is, the watch is fitted with a original Radiomir dial before they change into Luminor. So here we have an highly radium dial with the original hands. And more importantly, the watch has been engraved with these letters and numbers, CC number 1. CC stands for Corpo Carabinieri, and of course number 1. So it's the first watch that was delivered to the Italian frogman that belonged to the Corpo di Carabinieri, that is the Italian military police, and it's the first time that appears at auction. Has been absolutely well preserved, because as you know, those watches were suited for diving and military activities. This has been surprisingly survived in excellent condition, and is the first time ever that this watch appears. We, thanks to some researchers, we believe that only 30 were delivered to the military Italian force, and only 12 surfaced into the market in the last decades. This is number 1, as I said, a very cool watch. And always, I'm always pleased to highlight vintage Panerais, because in my point of view, they are iconic watches, important divers watches, where the market still, I think, is not giving the right attention to this absolutely rare timepiece.
How old is this actually?
So we believe that the watch has been made in between 1958 and 1960. You know that Rolex was the movement supplier, and thanks to some archives that have been found, we know that only 500 611 calibers were delivered to Panerai. So again, here you can understand how rare are they.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned it changed from Radiomir to
Luminor.
Luminor.
Yes.
That was referring to the luminescent material in the dial?
Correct, because of course, as you know, that in the early 60s, regulation, especially in Switzerland, obliged Swiss manufacturers to replace the luminous material from radium to tritium, that was less radioactive, so less harmful to the wearer. Here, so Panerai, during the services, when the watches were sent back to Panerai for service, they were replacing the dial and adding the new generation of dials called Luminor. Here we still have the original one with also the original Radiomir hands that are slightly different from the Luminor hands, because the Luminor hands are slightly slimmer compared to the Radiomir. So these are really extraordinary and highly rare timepiece.
It's really fascinating, like seeing an original like this, and then seeing all the subsequent commercial history, but like seeing the originals is
yes, because
really
don't forget that the Panerais back then were not available to the public. They were only delivered to the Italian military forces.
It was a civilian company, or was it like a government?
No, it was an official supplier to the Italian military forces.
Wow.
Only when basically Vendôme back then and now Richemont bought the company, then Panerai's watches were available to the public.
Did they make anything else other than watches?
Yes, of course, they were making also military instruments to measure distance, and in some cases also to measure the time for missiles or even torpedoes.
I see. It's really interesting because people often forget that watchmakers sometimes started as kind of engineering companies, huh? Like
Absolutely.
IWC was owned by an engineering conglomerate at one point. Leica was actually just as well known for its measuring instruments as for its cameras.
Absolutely.
Super interesting. Okay, and then this is...
So here the next lot that I would like to introduce to you today is an Omega, is a constellation, but here we have a rare configuration of a constellation model that was introduced first in the 50s and is still available today. Here is so-called the deluxe version. Why? Because it was fitted with a diamond index dial, and as you spotted correctly, Mark, during the private viewing, the date window is also surrounded by gold material to highlight really the luxury side of this version. Quite rare, because not many examples surfaced in the auction market. This watch was made in 1962, and also interesting, it was delivered to Hong Kong. Because also back then, constellations were at the same level of day date. They were considered really high, first reliable wristwatches, but also they were so-called high-end or dress watches.
And you mentioned this is, because it's a dress watch, it's more seldomly used. Like you tend to find dress watches.
Yeah, that's why this example is in excellent condition. We don't see sign of polishing. We don't see aging on the dial. That's why it's so, well preserved, and now we can offer it really in outstanding condition.
Yeah, fantastic. I love the lugs on this. It's so crisp and such complex shapes. And it's screwback too, so it's
Absolutely, yeah.
it used to be somewhat water resistant. Fascinating. Okay, and then this is the star for the auction this year, this season. Huh?
We have now the star of the auction, that is the Patek Philippe 2499 first series. Many things to talk about this lot, this reference. So, first, it was previously unknown. You know that for vintage Patek, when we are able to offer previously unknown watches, is always an excitement for the market. Secondly, is the first series, of course, the first generation of the iconic 2499 reference. The first series was available with two cases, the Vichy and the Wenger. The Wenger, as the present one, is the most desirable one because it has a slightly larger diameter compared to the Vichy. We are talking about 1.5, 1.7 millimeter difference. So, of course, for today, collectors is the most desirable and most wearable also configuration. So, also, is not only was previously unknown, but is also offered from the descendant of the original owner. The watch was bought in Italy in 1956 and has been in the family safe until basically a couple of months ago.
Wow.
Italian, of course, is also confirmed by the Italian calendar. Today, on 2499 yellow gold first series, only 22 examples are known, and with the Italian calendar, no more than 5 are known. Going deeper, not only previously unknown from the original family, extraordinary rare with the Italian calendar, we also have here something that is extremely unique, and this is the only example known with the original accessories. So in our community, we say it is a full set watch. That is quite remarkable because we have the original certificate of origin, where of course the movement number is stated. We have the original envelope to hold, to keep basically the certificate of origin, where the movement number is printed on top of the letter in order to avoid any kind of mistakes. And lastly, we have the original box where the watch was delivered when it was bought. And of course, we have the extra from the archives. Two other things to talk about the accessories. First is in the certificate of origin, we have for the first time this secret code that is below the Patek Philippe signature. So here you have 4 letters that in the Patek Philippe code means exactly when the watch was sold and delivered. So ATHR, according to the Patek code, it means December 56. So exactly when the watch was bought by the original owner. And also it's quite interesting to mention that Patek introduced this secret code in the mid-50s. So as far as we know, this is one of the first certificate known as well with that code.
What was the reason for having the code?
So basically also because back then, the retailers sometimes they were not putting the date or they were not that accurate as today. So it was useful for Patek to know exactly when the watch was delivered or sold. Another interesting thing of the box that we were discussing previously is the size. So as you can see, it looks like more like a sunglasses holder, you know. But that was the original format of boxes that Patek was delivering, even in highly complicated wristwatches. Today, as you know, we are used to have much bigger sizes.
Yeah.
The reason why they were delivering watches with such a box, because basically the owner was able to carry the watch with its original box inside the jacket pocket. So also I think a very elegant touch from Patek Philippe in the 50s.
Was this common with other brands, or this was kind of a Patek thing?
I have to say that other brands were delivering boxes in the same size, but they were more like rectangular shaped. Here, as you see, the corners are slightly rounded to make it more comfortable.
It's a very elegant shape. It's really beautiful.
So here, not only is a highly important vintage Patek Philippe, but as you can see from all the details, the provenance, the uniqueness, the accessories, this really makes this 2499 really outstanding.
It's much bigger than I expected, seeing in the metal. That case clearly makes a big difference.
That's why also is so, let's say, is one of the favorite models by today's collector, because it's actually the size is 37.7 millimeter.
Wow.
Absolutely making the watch extremely comfortable on the wrist.
Fantastic. Okay, and then what do we have here?
So from Patek we go to another, of course, iconic model, Rolex. And here we have a really rare Datejust reference. So it's reference 6104, also made in the mid-50s. And according to our researcher, this reference was made only for a couple of years. It's quite obscure. We don't have really much information because back then the evolution for Datejust models was very quick, because Rolex was replacing cases, movements, dial configuration quite quickly. So we know that it was made, as I said, for a couple of years. What I really like about this example is the case back. It has the bombé or rounded case back that is basically coming from the bubble back series, but just oversized. That's why the Italians, they call it ovettone, because bubble back in Italian is called ovetto. So ovettone means the bigger size of the ovetto. So extremely rare. What I also would like to point out is the incredible and extremely elegant black dial with contrasting gold, of course, indexes. And you have the so-called roulette date, because the date is in black and red. So like when you go to La Roulette in the casino, you have the, of course, black and red color. So here you have a configuration of a date wheel that was quite common for Rolex in the 50s, but is quite rare today, because when watches were serviced by Rolex, the date wheel was replaced to a more contemporary one. They were using more the black color.
Oh, I see.
So still has been well preserved. This was offered by an important Hong Kong collector, and it's the first time that this watch appears at auction, and I think it's extremely elegant as well.
Yeah. And you mentioned that these would normally have a cyclops on them as well.
Yes, the crystal was, of course, with a cyclone lens. The owner decided to have a more flat crystal in order to, admire more the beauty of the dial and to make it an aspect more as well also elegant. Another aspect to mention is the polished bezel. Usually they were using a more ribbed bezel, and also the oyster, so-called oyster style bracelet instead of our Jubilee one.
It's a fascinating watch. Fascinating. Thank you for showing us. Okay, and then finally, last but not least.
A unique piece. As you know, François Paul Journe is extremely in high demand right now by the market, by collectors. Here we are pleased to offer an earlier model of François Paul Journe, but it's not signed François Paul Journe because it's signed Henry Winston. So in the 2000, Max Busser was the CEO of the watch division of Henry Winston, and he decided to start a new line of watches collaborating with important watchmakers. And the first model, he decided to collaborate with François Paul Journe. So this is the Opus 1. And the Opus 1 was basically launched with three different movements. The tourbillon, the resonance, and the power reserve. Here we have the tourbillon à égalité, remontoir à égalité example with power reserve. Only 4 examples were made without diamonds, and each of them is unique because they were fitted with 4 different colored dials. In Geneva, a couple of weeks ago, we had the pleasure to offer the same model with a blue dial. Here we have the same reference, the same complication, but fitted with a more attractive, in my point of view, so-called pinkish or reddish color. Interestingly, the watch is offered by the original owner, a Japanese collector that bought in the Henry Winston boutique in Ginza in Tokyo in 2001. So we also have the original accessories of the watch. And as all François Paul Journe collectors know, the first models were made, the movement were in brass, and of course the diameter is 38 millimeter. And as you can see, the caseback and the dial are both printed and engraved with pièce unique, because as I said, there was just basically one. So
who
these are rare.
these cases?
It was Max Busser. So basically, François Paul Journe was delivering the movement, and then Max was designing the case.
So interesting. And this would have been sold concurrent to the FP Journe tourbillon as well.
Yes, correct.
Both were on the market at the same time.
Yeah, they were.
Was
both.
one more expensive than the other?
Very good question.
I assume the Harry Winston would probably have been more expensive.
We can assume that, yes. We don't know exactly, but we can assume that, yeah.
Wow, fascinating. Okay, well, thank you very much for this really great overview.
My pleasure.
So the auction preview is happening next week, is that correct?
Yes, so we start the preview at the JW Marriott at Pacific Place on June 2nd. We have the evening session starting on June 5th at 7 p.m. Hong Kong time, followed by the day session on June 6th, starting at 12 p.m. Hong Kong time. So please do not hesitate to visit our beautiful preview at the Marriott, or if you're not in Hong Kong, contact our department. More than pleased to answer all your questions.
I will definitely be there. If you've never been to an auction preview, it's a really fun experience, and it's actually a really great time to learn about watches. You go and you see some incredible examples of stuff, and it's just such variety that you wouldn't find anywhere else. So if you've never been, I highly recommend you go, and honestly, maybe even leave a bid and see what you come home with. All right, that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and thank you, Mr. Perazzi, for joining us.
Thank you, Mark.